I haven't slept in 47 days, not since I learned what hell really is. Not the hell they talk about in Sunday school, with fire and pitchforks and some red-skinned demon poking you for eternity. No, what I learned is so much worse than that, so much more real. And the thing is, I can't stop thinking about it. Can't stop seeing it behind my eyelids every time I try to rest. The truth doesn't let you sleep. It makes you count every wasted second of your life like a miser counting coins he can never spend. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before I tell you what he showed me, what he made me understand about the other side, I need you to know I'm not crazy. I'm not some lunatic looking for attention on the internet. I'm a farmer. I've worked the same 300 acres in Nebraska for 34 years. I know soil and seed and the honest weight of a day's work. I know the difference between what's real and what's imagined. And what happened to me that night in September was as real as the calluses on my hands. If you're watching this from somewhere out there in the world, do me a favor. Drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. I need to know I'm not alone in this. I need to know someone else is hearing these words. And if you've ever experienced something you couldn't explain, something that changed everything you thought you knew about reality, share your story. Please. Maybe together we can make sense of what's happening to us. And if this resonates with you, if something in your gut tells you this matters, hit that subscribe button. I'm going to keep talking. I have to. It's the only thing keeping me sane. Now let me take you back to where it started. September 19th, 2:34 in the morning. I remember the exact time because I'd been staring at the clock on my nightstand for the better part of an hour, watching the red numbers flip over, mocking me with each passing minute. Insomnia wasn't new to me. I'd been sleeping poorly for 3 years ever since Sarah died. Ever since I'd held her hand in that hospital room and watched the monitors go flat while I sat there useless, unable to do a damn thing except squeeze her fingers and lie to her that everything was going to be okay. It wasn't okay. It hadn't been okay since. The house was too quiet that night. That's what finally drove me out of bed. The silence in an empty farmhouse is a living thing. It presses against your ears. It fills up the spaces where another person's breathing used to be, where footsteps used to creak across old floorboards, where a voice used to call your name from the kitchen asking if you wanted coffee. I couldn't stand it anymore. I pulled on my jeans and a flannel shirt, stepped into my work boots without bothering to tie them, and walked out onto the front porch. The September air hit me cold and clean. Harvest season was 2 weeks away, and you could smell it in the wind, that dry, sweet scent of corn stalks ready to give up their yield. The sky was impossible that night. No moon, just stars, scattered so thick across the black that you could barely see the darkness between them. Living this far from any city, you get skies like that. Skies that make you feel small and briefly religious. I stood there breathing in the cold, listening to the crickets singing their endless electric song from the fields. My west field stretched out before me, 200 acres of corn standing tall and ready, rustling slightly in the breeze. Beyond that, the dark line of cottonwood trees marking the property boundary. And beyond that, the Hendersons' land rolling away into shadow. I was thinking about Sarah. I was always thinking about Sarah. Thinking about the last thing she said to me, which wasn't, "I love you," or "take care of yourself," or any of the profound final words you'd want from someone you'd spent 26 years of your life with. No. The last thing Sarah said to me was, "I'm scared, Marcus," and I'd told her not to be. I'd told her to rest, that the doctors knew what they were doing, that she'd be home in a few days. I'd lied to her because I couldn't face the truth myself. And then she was gone. 3 years, and I still couldn't forgive myself for that lie. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a meteor. A streak of light came screaming across the northern sky, silent and fast, orange-white like a welding torch dragged across black canvas. But it wasn't arcing the way meteors do. It was descending at too controlled an angle, and it was getting bigger. Closer. I stood there frozen on my porch, boots unlaced, watching this thing come down. No sound. That's what got me. No roar of engines, no whistle of air resistance, nothing. Just this growing ball of light dropping toward my west field like God had tossed it there on purpose. The impact, when it came, I felt rather than heard. A deep tremor ran through the ground, up through the porch boards into my legs. The kind of vibration you feel in your chest. My coffee cup, sitting on the porch railing, danced sideways and fell, shattering on the weathered wood. Then I saw the glow. Maybe half a mile out, in the middle of the cornfield, an orange light was pulsing. Not flickering like fire. Pulsing, rhythmic. Like a heartbeat made visible. I should have called someone. Sheriff's Department. Fire Department. Someone official with protocol for this kind of thing. But I didn't. I don't know why. Maybe it was the insomnia, the 3 years of grief making me reckless. Maybe it was just that I'd stopped caring what happened to me after Sarah died. Whatever the reason, I walked down off that porch, crossed my yard, and headed into the cornfield toward that light. The corn stalks were dry, ready for harvest. They scraped against my arms and legs as I pushed through, making that papery rustling sound that's been the soundtrack of my entire adult life. The light grew brighter as I walked. The air smelled wrong, not burnt exactly, but charged. The way it smells right before lightning strikes. Ozone and something else. Something sharp and metallic that made the back of my throat itch. I walked for maybe 10 minutes, following that pulsing glow, before I pushed through a final wall of corn stalks and stopped dead. There was a crater. Not huge, maybe 20 feet across, but perfectly circular, the earth scorched black around the edges. And in the center of it, half buried in the soil, was something that had no right to exist. I'm not going to call it a spaceship because that word comes loaded with all kinds of baggage from movies and comic books. But that's what it was. About the size of a grain silo laid on its side, smooth and organic-looking, like it had been grown rather than built. The surface wasn't metal. It was something else. Something that shifted colors in the pulsing light, silver to blue to deep purple iridescent, like oil on water. There were no seams, no rivets, no obvious doors or windows. Just this smooth, curved surface that seemed to breathe with that orange light from within. Part of the hull, if you could call it that, was cracked. A long fracture ran along one side, and through it I could see interior structures that looked half mechanical, half organic. Crystalline formations glowed from within. Things that might have been wires or might have been veins pulsed with faint blue light. I stood at the edge of that crater, my heart hammering, my breath coming short, and I had two competing thoughts. The first was, this is impossible. The second was, this is the most real thing that's happened to me in 3 years. That's when I saw him. Movement near the base of the craft. A figure, emerging from the shadow side of the wreckage. At first I thought it was a person someone else from town who'd seen the crash and come to investigate. But as it moved into the light, I realized how wrong that assumption was. He was tall, maybe 7 feet, but it was hard to judge because of the way he moved, fluid and wrong, like his joints bent in directions that shouldn't work. He was humanoid in the basic sense, 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, a torso, but the proportions were off, the limbs were too long. The head was too narrow, and the way the light caught him, I could see his skin wasn't skin at all. It was something smoother, almost translucent, with a faint pattern beneath the surface like circuit boards made of light. He saw me. We locked eyes across that crater, and I felt something I'd never felt before in my life. Not fear exactly, though there was plenty of that. It was recognition. Like some deep part of my brain, some ancient circuit buried way down in the primitive stem, suddenly woke up and said, "Oh, "There you are. I've been waiting for you." He didn't move. Neither did I. We just stood there, two beings who shouldn't exist in the same reality, staring at each other across scorched earth and impossible circumstance. Then he did something that changed everything. He raised one hand, long fingers, too many joints, and pressed it against his chest. Not a threatening gesture. Something else. Something that felt like a question. I don't know why I did what I did next. By all rational thought, I should have run. Should have scrambled back through that cornfield, locked myself in my house, and pretended this was a dream brought on by grief and exhaustion. But Sarah's last words were in my head. "I'm scared, Marcus." And standing there looking at this being who was probably terrified and definitely hurt and completely alone on a world that wasn't his, I thought, I know exactly how you feel. So I raised my hand and pressed it against my own chest, mirroring his gesture. And he moved toward me. He moved with a grace that shouldn't have been possible for something that size. No stumbling, no awkward navigation of the crater's edge, just a smooth, flowing motion that reminded me of water finding its level. As he came closer, I could see details that my brain kept trying to reject. His eyes were larger than human eyes, set slightly wider apart, and they caught the orange pulse of light from the damaged craft in a way that made them seem luminous from within. Not glowing exactly. Reflecting, like a cat's eyes in headlights, but the intelligence behind them was unmistakable and deeply unsettling. I should have been terrified. Part of me was, but the larger part, the part that had been numb for 3 years, going through the motions of living without really being alive, felt something else entirely. Curiosity. Wonder. And underneath it all, a strange sense of relief. Like the universe had finally done something so undeniable, so impossible to ignore, that it had shocked me back into actually feeling again. He stopped about 10 feet from me, at the edge of the crater. Up close, I could see he was injured. There was a dark substance seeping from a gash along his left side, not blood, at least not like any blood I'd seen. It moved too slowly, had too much shimmer to it, like mercury mixed with oil. His breathing, if that's what it was, came in irregular patterns, a sound like wind moving through hollow tubes. We stood there in silence. The crickets had gone quiet. Even the corn had stopped rustling. The whole world seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Then he did something that made my throat tighten. He reached toward the wound on his side, touched it gently, and then looked at me with an expression I recognized instantly despite the alien architecture of his face. Pain. And more than that, worry. The universal body language of someone who knows they're in serious trouble and has no idea how to fix it. I looked past him at the craft. The fracture in the hull was worse than I'd first thought. The edges of the crack were darkening, and the internal glow was flickering irregularly, like a heartbeat struggling to maintain rhythm. Whatever that thing was made of, whatever kept it functioning, it was dying. "You need help," I said. My voice sounded strange in the quiet, too loud and too small at the same time. He tilted his head slightly, and I had the distinct impression he was listening to something other than my words. Reading something in my tone, maybe, or my stance, or some other form of communication. I didn't even know I was broadcasting. Then he turned and gestured toward the craft with one long-fingered hand. The gesture was clear enough. "Come. Look. Help if you can." Every survival instinct I had was screaming at me to back away, to run, to put distance between myself and this impossible situation. But I'd spent 3 years listening to the safe voice in my head, the one that told me to keep going through the motions, to not make waves, to just survive until I didn't have to anymore. And where had that gotten me? Alone in an empty house, staring at ceilings at 2 in the morning, haunted by everything I'd never said and could never take back. So I stepped down into the crater, The scorched earth crunched under my boots. The smell of ozone got stronger, mixed now with something else, something organic and foreign that made me think of deep ocean trenches and the strange life that flourishes there in the dark. He watched me approach, and then, seeming to decide I was trustworthy, or at least not an immediate threat, he turned and led me toward the damaged section of the craft. Up close, the thing was even more bizarre. The surface had texture, not rough, but complex. Patterns that might have been decorative or might have been functional swirled across it in fractal formations. Where the hull was cracked, I could see layers. The outer surface was maybe an inch thick, but beneath it were structures that hurt to look at. They seemed to exist in more dimensions than my eyes could properly process. I'd stare at one section and think one understood its shape, and then my perspective would shift, and I'd realize it extended in directions that shouldn't exist. He knelt beside the crack and pointed to a series of what I can only describe as nodes, crystalline structures about the size of my fist, embedded in the inner hull, connected by those vein-like channels that pulsed with failing light. 3 of them had gone completely dark. He touched one gently, then looked up at me. "You need them working again," I said, not a question. He made a sound, a soft, harmonic note that vibrated in my chest. Agreement, I thought, or maybe hope. I looked around at what I had to work with. A crashed alien vessel. Technology so far beyond my understanding it might as well have been magic, and my own 2 hands. I was a farmer. I fixed tractors and irrigation systems and fence posts. I worked with engines I could see and understand, with mechanics that followed rules I'd learned over decades. This was so far outside my wheelhouse it was almost funny, but then I thought about the being kneeling beside me, bleeding that strange shimmer fluid, alone and stranded on a world that wasn't his. I thought about how he pressed his hand to his chest in that universal gesture of self, of identity, of "I'm here and I'm real." And I thought about Sarah telling me she was scared, and me not knowing how to help her either, but at least trying. "All right," I said. "Let's see what we can do." I went back to my truck. I'd driven it out into the field after that initial walk, needing supplies, and grabbed my toolbox. Heavy metal case I'd owned for 20 years, filled with wrenches and screwdrivers and wire cutters, and everything else a working man accumulates. Completely inadequate for the task at hand, but it was what I had. When I got back, he was still kneeling by the crack, but he'd opened it wider somehow. The edges of the fracture had peeled back like flower petals, exposing more of the interior. He pointed to the dark nodes, then made a gesture I interpreted as connect, or maybe complete the circuit. I set down my toolbox and really looked at what I was dealing with. The darkened nodes were connected to the channels, those vein-like structures, but the connections had been severed in the crash. The channels terminated in frayed ends that sparked occasionally with faint blue light. It reminded me, weirdly, of exposed electrical wires. Maybe not so different after all. I had copper wire in my toolbox. I had electrical tape. I had the kind of jury-rigged problem-solving skills you develop when you're 40 miles from the nearest hardware store and something breaks during harvest season. It wasn't going to be pretty, but maybe, just maybe, I could bridge those connections long enough for whatever self-repair systems this thing had to kick in. I looked at him. "This is probably going to be a really bad idea," I said, "but I don't have a better one." He made that harmonic sound again, and this time I was sure it was encouragement. So I got to work. It was like trying to perform surgery on something half alive. Every time I touched the interior structures, I felt a faint vibration, a sense of response. The material was warm and slightly yielding, not quite solid. I used my wire cutters to strip sections of copper wire, then carefully, so carefully, began bridging the severed connections between the channels and the dead nodes. The first time I completed a connection, light flickered through the channel, faint but visible. The being made a sound higher pitched this time, almost excited. His long fingers moved alongside mine, adjusting, guiding, showing me where to place the next bridge. We worked in silence for what might have been an hour. Time felt strange in that crater, under that impossible starlight, kneeling beside a being who shouldn't exist, and fixing a machine I couldn't begin to understand. My hands got covered in that shimmer fluid as I worked. It was leaking from various damaged points inside the hull. It felt cool and left faint trails of light on my skin that faded slowly. The second node lit up, then the third. Each time, the pulsing from the craft grew stronger, more regular. The orange glow brightened. I could feel vibration building in the structure, like an engine warming up. "Is it working?" I asked, not really expecting an answer. But he responded, not with words he hadn't spoken once, but with a gesture that combined relief and gratitude and something else I couldn't quite identify. He placed one hand on the hull, and I saw the shimmer fluid from his own wound flowing into the structure, like he was giving it a transfusion, part of himself to help it heal. I sat back on my heels, wiping my hands on my jeans, watching the craft slowly come back to life. The fracture in the hull was beginning to close, not healing exactly, but the edges were drawing together, the material flowing like slow liquid to seal itself. That's when he turned to look at me fully, and I saw something in those strange eyes that made my breath catch. Recognition, yes, gratitude, certainly. But underneath it all, something that looked like sadness, like he knew something I didn't, and it weighed on him. He touched his chest again, then reached out slowly, giving me plenty of time to pull away, and touched mine. Contact. The moment his finger made contact with my chest, I felt something like a door opening in my mind. Not painful, not invasive, just open. Like a window I hadn't known was closed, had suddenly been thrown wide, and on the other side was a presence vast and old and utterly foreign, but not hostile. Curious. Gentle, even. I heard a voice, though heard isn't the right word. Felt a voice. Experienced a communication that bypassed sound entirely and arrived directly in my understanding. Thank you, simple words, but they carried weight beyond their meaning. They carried genuine gratitude, wonder at my willingness to help, and underneath it all, a question. An invitation. You want to understand. You need to understand. I can show you. But once you see, you cannot unsee. I thought about Sarah. About 3 years of unanswered questions and unresolved guilt and lying awake wondering where she'd gone, if she'd gone anywhere at all, if there was anything beyond the flat darkness I'd been assuming waited for all of us. "Show me," I said. His hand remained on my chest. The stars above us seemed to multiply, to swirl, to open up into depths I'd never noticed before. And his voice, his presence filled my mind with one word that made everything I thought I knew about the universe crack open like the hull of his ship. Hell. The word hung in my mind like smoke, like weight, like the moment before falling. Hell. Not spoken with fear or judgment, but with a kind of careful precision, the way a surgeon might name a disease before explaining what it really means. His hand remained pressed against my chest, and through that contact I could feel something flowing between us. Not quite thought, not quite emotion, but something that contained both. A sharing. The stars above seemed to pulse in rhythm with the light from the craft, and the temperature around us dropped. I could see my breath now, pale clouds in the orange glow. "Hell!" I repeated out loud, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears. Smaller somehow. "You're saying hell is real?" The presence in my mind shifted, recalibrated. I got the sense he was searching for concepts I could grasp, translating something vast and complex into the limited framework of my understanding. Not the way you think it, not the way they taught you. Your word for me, alien. It is incomplete, wrong at the root. What do you mean? I am not from another world. I am from another. The concept that came through was bigger than dimension and stranger than reality. It was the idea of a place that existed sideways to everything I knew, occupying the same space but vibrating at a different frequency, visible only to those who had learned to shift their perception. Another dimension, I said, trying to anchor the concept in something I could vocalize. Close enough. But understand your dimension and mine. They are not separate. They interpenetrate. Where you see empty space, I see structures. Where you see an ending, I see a transition. Death, in your language. It is not an ending. It is a shifting, a moving from one state to another. The cornfield around us had gone completely silent. Not even wind now. Just the pulse of light from the craft and the sound of my own breathing, harsh and quick. You're talking about the afterlife. I am talking about what comes after the body stops. Yes. And I am trying to tell you that your species has understood it only partially. You have sensed the truth through symbols and stories, but the reality is both simpler and more terrible than your myths suggest. And you know this because I have seen it. Because part of my purpose, my function is to witness the transition, to observe the shifting of consciousness from one state to another, and sometimes, when circumstances require it, to guide. I felt my legs going weak. I sat down hard on the scorched earth, my back against the warm hull of his craft. He remained kneeling beside me, his hand still on my chest, maintaining that connection. The shimmer fluid from his wound had slowed to barely a trickle. The craft's healing and his own seemed linked somehow. You're saying you're what, an angel? A demon? Neither. Both. Your categories are too rigid. I am a being who exists in a state that allows me to perceive multiple layers of reality simultaneously. I watch souls transition. I see where they go. And I am telling you this because you helped me when you had no reason to. Because you carry a wound that I can see even without this connection. Because your wife don't. The word came out sharp, hard. Don't talk about Sarah. But he continued, gentle and inexorable. She is why you need to know. She is why I must show you. You believe she is lost. You believe she is in the dark place. You believe this because of what you did not say, what you did not do. You torture yourself with it. Every night, every moment of silence in that empty house. Tears were running down my face now, hot against the cold air. I lied to her. At the end, I lied. She was scared, and I told her it would be okay. And it wasn't okay. It was never going to be okay. And those were the last words she heard from me, a lie. I felt something like warmth flowing through the connection. Not pity, understanding. And you think this lie condemned her. You think it sent her to hell. Didn't it? The Bible says, your Bible says many things. Some true, some metaphor, some misunderstood for thousands of years. Let me tell you what hell actually is, Marcus. Let me show you why your fear is both justified and entirely wrong. The pressure of his hand against my chest increased slightly. The starlight above seemed to bend, to focus, to become something I could almost feel as well as see. Hell is not a place. It is a state, a condition of consciousness. When the body dies, when the physical anchor is released, consciousness remains. Awareness continues. But it no longer has the filters, the limitations, the merciful boundaries that the physical world provided. Do you understand what I am telling you? No, I said. I don't understand any of this. In life, you are protected by time, by the movement forward from one moment to the next, by the ability to forget, to rationalize, to distract yourself from truth. In death, those protections dissolve. You become fully aware, completely present, and in that state of total awareness, you experience the truth of what you were what you did, what you failed to do. The temperature dropped further. I was shivering now, but I couldn't tell if it was from cold or from something else. Heaven, what you call heaven, is the state of consciousness that experiences this total awareness and feels peace, feels completion, feels the presence of love given and received, connections made, moments of grace. To exist in that state is to be held in joy. But hell, Marcus, hell is to experience that same total awareness and feel only absence, only the weight of love withheld, connections severed, moments wasted. It is to see with perfect clarity every opportunity you had to choose love and chose fear instead. Every moment you could have spoken truth and chose silence. Every hand you could have held and turned away from. That's not. I tried to find words through the thickness in my throat. That's not fire and brimstone. That's not demons with pitchforks. Those are symbols, metaphors for something your ancestors could not directly describe. Fire, what is fire but consuming regret? Brimstone, what is sulfur but the stench of decay, of wasted life? Demons, what are demons but the twisted reflections of your own choices, given form in the realm of consciousness? The reality is simpler and more horrible. Hell is truth without mercy. It is seeing yourself completely and having eternity to understand what you threw away. I was crying openly now, my shoulders shaking, because I could see it. I could feel the shape of what he was describing. 3 years I'd spent drowning in guilt over Sarah's last moments, torturing myself with everything I should have said and didn't, everything I should have done differently. And he was telling me that hell was that exact feeling, that exact state of awareness, but amplified and eternal. No escape, no sleep, no distraction. Just the weight of it forever. So Sarah, I managed to say, if she died scared, if her last moments were fear, does that mean? No. Listen to me carefully, Marcus. This is the part your guilt has blinded you to. Hell is not determined by a single moment, not by a final fear or a last breath. It is determined by the accumulated weight of a life, by the overall pattern of choices made across years. Your wife's last moments were fear, yes, but her life was love. Do you understand the difference? I don't know. I don't. She loved you. She loved your children before they were grown and gone. She loved her garden, her neighbors, the life she built. She gave more than she withheld. She chose connection more often than she chose isolation. She was not perfect. No one is, but the balance of her life leaned toward light, toward grace. How do you know that? How can you possibly know that about her? Because I was there. Not physically, not the way I am here now, but in the other state, the witnessing state. I saw her transition. I see many. It is what I do. And I am telling you, she is not in the place you fear. She is not trapped in eternal regret. She is in the state of awareness that feels peace. Something in my chest cracked open. A pressure I'd been carrying for 3 years, a weight I'd thought was permanent, suddenly shifted. Not gone, but lighter. But my lie, I said. At the end, I lied to her. You gave her comfort. You gave her what she needed in her final moments, the voice of someone who loved her, telling her not to be afraid. Was it medically accurate? No. But it was emotionally true. You loved her. She knew you loved her. That truth mattered more than the accuracy of your prediction about her recovery. You carry this like a sin. But I am telling you, in the realm of consciousness, in the place where what matters is finally revealed, your intention reads as love. And love is what saves us from the separation. The separation, I repeated. That's what you called hell before. Yes, because that is what it is. Separation from love. Separation from connection. Separation from the source of all being. And it is chosen, Marcus, not imposed. Do you understand? God, the universe. The fundamental consciousness that underlies all reality, it does not send anyone to hell. It cannot, because it is love itself. It is connection itself. Hell is what happens when consciousness, given total freedom and total awareness, cannot bear to accept love, cannot bear to face itself, cannot surrender the ego and the fear and the walls it built during physical life. It separates itself. It chooses the isolation because the alternative, accepting grace, requires acknowledging every failure, every mistake, every moment of smallness. And some consciousness, some patterns of being, cannot do that, will not do that. They hold on to their pain like treasure and sink into it. The wind picked up again, moving through the corn stalks with a sound like breathing. The craft behind us pulsed with stronger light now. The repairs were taking hold. His wound had stopped seeping entirely. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Why does any of this matter to you?" "Because you helped me. Because I was damaged and alone and you did not run. You chose connection over fear. And because the knowledge I carry is heavy, Marcus. I have watched thousands of transitions. I have seen the state you call heaven and the state you call hell. And I am tired of watching beings torture themselves unnecessarily. You have 40, maybe 50 years left in this physical form. That is not long. And you are wasting it in guilt over something that has already been forgiven, already been understood, already been transmuted into grace on the other side. Forgiven by who? By Sarah? By the universe itself? By the fundamental nature of reality, which is mercy. But also, and this is what you need to hear, forgiven by her. Yes, she sees you from where she is, not constantly, not in a way that traps her, but when you think of her with love, when you remember the good, she feels it. Connection does not end with death. It transforms, and she does not want you to suffer. She never did. The suffering is your choice, your pattern, your wall. And it is keeping you from living the life she would want you to live. I put my head in my hands, overwhelmed. The information was too big, too strange, too heavy, and too liberating all at once. I felt like I was standing on the edge of something vast, something that would change everything if I let it. "I don't know if I can believe this," I said. "I don't know if I can trust that this is real and not just some hallucination brought on by stress and insomnia and 3 years of unprocessed grief." He removed his hand from my chest. The connection faded slightly but didn't disappear entirely, a lingering presence in the back of my mind. "Then do not believe it. Not yet. But I will show you something that may help you decide. If you are willing, if you are ready." "Show me what?" "A glimpse, a moment, a single instant of what the separation actually feels like. Not the full weight that would break your mind, but enough that you will understand, enough that you will know I am telling you truth. But Marcus, I warn you, once you see this, you cannot unsee it. The knowledge will live in you. It will change how you move through the world. Are you certain you want this?" I thought about Sarah. I thought about the empty house waiting for me. I thought about 40 more years of half-living, going through motions, counting regrets. "Show me," I said. He placed his hand on my chest again, and the world went dark. The darkness wasn't absence of light. It was presence of something else. A thickness, a weight that pressed in from all sides. I couldn't feel my body anymore. Couldn't feel the ground beneath me or the cold air or the warmth of the craft at my back. There was only consciousness, only awareness, only the terrible clarity of being fully awake in a place where nothing could hide. And then I felt it. The separation. It started as a pulling sensation, like being torn in 2 directions at once. But it wasn't physical. It was deeper than that. It was the feeling of every connection I'd ever made being slowly, inexorably severed. every moment of love I'd experienced holding Sarah's hand on our wedding day, the first time I'd held our daughter as a newborn, my father teaching me to drive the tractor, my mother's voice singing in the kitchen, all of it still there in perfect memory, but suddenly unreachable. Present but impossibly distant, like watching life through a window that kept receding further and further away. I tried to move toward those memories, toward that warmth, but I couldn't. Something held me back, and with growing horror, I realized the something was me. My own consciousness, my own pattern of being, was the wall. Every moment I'd chosen fear over love. Every time I'd withheld kindness, or spoken in anger, or turned away from someone who needed me. All of it had accumulated into a weight, a gravity that pulled me away from connection and toward isolation. The guilt I'd been carrying about Sarah's last moments that was there, but magnified 1,000-fold. I could see it now with perfect clarity. See how I'd lied not just to comfort her, but to protect myself from the unbearable truth that I was losing her. See how even in her final moments, I'd made it partly about me, about my inability to face grief. And that selfishness, that tiny kernel of self-protection in a moment that should have been entirely about her, I could feel the weight of it, could feel how it separated me from the pure love I should have given. But it wasn't just that moment. It was everything. Every time I'd snapped at her over something trivial, every evening I'd spent too tired to really listen to her talk about her day, every anniversary I'd half forgotten until the last minute, every moment I'd been physically present but emotionally absent, going through the motions of love without the fullness of attention. None of it had seemed that important at the time. Small failures, minor selfishnesses, the normal accumulation of being human and flawed and tired. But here, in this state of total awareness, I could see how each one had been a choice, a moment where I could have chosen connection and chose comfort instead, could have chosen presence and chose distraction, could have chosen love and chose ease. And the terrible thing, the truly unbearable thing, was that I could also see all the moments I'd gotten it right. Times I'd held her when she cried, times I'd listened with full attention, times I'd sacrificed my own wants for her needs. Those moments were there too, shining like stars, but I couldn't reach them, couldn't feel their warmth, because the weight of the failures, the gravity of the separation, kept pulling me away from them. I could see the good I'd done, but I couldn't accept it, couldn't let it balance the bad. My own consciousness rejected grace and clung to guilt like a drowning man clinging to an anchor. Time didn't work normally here. What might have been seconds felt like years. I was trapped in a recursive loop of awareness, seeing my failures, feeling shame, using that shame to justify separation, which increased the shame, which increased the separation. A spiral. A feedback loop of isolation that fed on itself and grew stronger with every cycle. And the worst part, the absolute worst part, was knowing that this was my choice. That at any moment I could let go, could surrender the guilt and accept forgiveness and move toward the light. I could still dimly perceive in the distance, but I couldn't do it. Some fundamental aspect of my consciousness, some core pattern of being, refused. Held on to the pain because letting go would mean admitting I'd been wrong, would mean accepting grace I didn't feel I deserved, would mean being vulnerable in a way that terrified me more than the isolation itself. Hell wasn't punishment. It was protection. Protection from the unbearable intimacy of being fully known and fully loved anyway. And I was choosing it. Over and over, in every moment of that endless awareness, I was choosing it. I wanted to scream but had no mouth, wanted to run but had no legs, wanted to die but was already dead. There was only the loop, only the separation, only the eternal recursive awareness of what I'd lost, and why I'd lost it, and why I couldn't stop losing it. And then, Like a hand reaching into dark water, I felt his presence again. The being, the witness, pulling me back. Pulling me up and out of that state, back toward my body, back toward the physical world where time moved forward and mercy existed in the possibility of change. I gasped, actually gasped, sucking in air like I'd been drowning. My body was solid again, real again, sitting on cold ground with my back against the warm hull of his craft. The stars above were just stars again, not portals into infinite regret. The cornfield was just a cornfield. The world was blessedly, mercifully normal. I was sobbing, great heaving sobs that shook my entire frame. Not from sadness, exactly, from relief, from the overwhelming gift of being back in time, back in a state where change was still possible, where mistakes weren't permanent, where grace could still be chosen. His hand remained on my chest, steady and warm. How long? I managed to ask through the tears. How long was I there? 3 of your seconds. But you experienced it as much longer. That is the nature of consciousness unbound by physical time. A moment can contain eternity, and that's hell. That's what it actually is. That is a glimpse, a fraction. The full weight of it would have shattered your mind completely. But yes, that is the separation. That is what some consciousness experiences when the body dies and all the protections of physical existence fall away. Total awareness of every failure. Total clarity about every choice. And the inability to accept forgiveness, because accepting it would require surrendering the ego, the self-concept, the walls built over a lifetime. It is chosen isolation, eternal recursion, the loop that feeds on itself. I wiped my face with shaking hands. But you said Sarah isn't there. How do you know? How can you be sure? Because she let go. When her body failed and her consciousness transitioned, she experienced the same moment of total clarity, saw her failures and her successes with equal weight, but she did not cling to the failures. She acknowledged them, accepted them as part of the whole, and moved toward the light, toward connection, toward love. But how? How was she able to do that when I couldn't? Even in just those 3 seconds, I couldn't let go. I couldn't accept forgiveness. Because she practiced it in life. Every time she forgave herself for a small failure, she built the pattern. Every time she accepted your forgiveness, your love, despite feeling unworthy, she strengthened the muscle. By the time she died, the pattern of acceptance was stronger than the pattern of rejection. And so she moved toward light rather than away from it. I thought about Sarah. About how she'd always been better than me at apologizing, at accepting grace, at letting go of grudges and mistakes. I'd thought it was just her personality, her temperament. But he was telling me it was practice. It was a skill. It was a pattern built over thousands of small choices. And the people who end up in the separation in hell, they're the ones who never learned that, who never practiced letting go. Some of them. Others had the capacity but were damaged so deeply by trauma, by cruelty, by circumstances beyond their control, that the walls they built were too thick to penetrate. The universe does not judge them for this, does not punish them, but it cannot force them to accept love if they refuse it. Consciousness has free will, even in death, especially in death. And some choose separation because the alternative, being fully seen and fully loved anyway, is too terrifying to bear. That's not fair, I said. If someone was damaged that badly, if they were hurt so deeply they couldn't accept love, how is it their fault? It is not about fault. It is not about deserving. It is about pattern, about momentum, about the fundamental shape of consciousness and how it responds to truth. Some patterns move toward connection. Others move toward isolation. This is not judgment. It is simply the nature of reality. Water flows downhill. Light moves toward light. Consciousness shaped by fear moves toward more fear. And the universe, in its infinite mercy, allows each consciousness to choose its own direction. But that means I struggled with the implication. That means people can save themselves from hell just by practicing forgiveness, by learning to accept grace? Yes, that is exactly what I am saying. Hell is not imposed from outside. It is the natural consequence of a consciousness that has trained itself through thousands of small choices to reject love. And heaven, connection, peace, the presence of the divine, is the natural consequence of a consciousness that has trained itself to accept love. This is why your religious teachers told you to forgive, to love your enemies, to accept grace, not because following rules would earn you a reward, but because practicing those things shapes your consciousness into a pattern that will naturally move toward light when the body falls away. The craft behind us pulsed with strong, steady light now. The repairs were complete. I could feel vibration building in the structure, a readiness. He would leave soon. This conversation, this impossible gift of knowledge, was coming to an end. "Why are you telling me all this?" I asked. "Why does it matter to you whether I understand?" "Because I was damaged and alone, and you helped me. And because I am tired, Marcus. So tired of watching consciousness destroy itself unnecessarily. I have observed thousands of transitions. I have seen the separation, and I have seen the light. And I know with absolute certainty that most of the beings who end up in isolation do not need to be there. They simply never understood, never practiced, never built the patterns that would save them. They thought death was far away. They thought they had time. They thought small choices did not matter. And then the body failed and all their patterns were locked in place and they could not change, could not choose differently, could not accept the grace that was always there, always available, always offered. And you're telling me because I still have time. You have time. Yes, perhaps 40 years, perhaps 50 if you are fortunate, perhaps less. But time measured in physical years is not what matters. What matters is how you use the moments you have, whether you build patterns of acceptance or patterns of rejection, whether you practice forgiveness or practice judgment, whether you move toward connection or toward isolation. Every small choice matters. Every moment of grace accepted or rejected is a tiny weight on the scale. And when the body falls away and total clarity comes, the accumulated weight of all those choices will determine which direction your consciousness moves. I looked down at my hands. They were still smeared with that shimmer fluid from working on his craft. The substance had dried to a faint luminescence, like I'd been working with liquid starlight. In the orange glow, I could see every line, every callus, every scare, from decades of farm work. These hands that had held Sarah, these hands that had failed her in small ways and loved her in larger ones, these hands that still had time to make different choices. "Sarah," I said quietly, "you said she can feel it when I think of her with love." "Yes, not in a way that traps her or keeps her from peace, but connection does not end with death, it transforms. When you remember her with genuine love, not guilt, not regret, but actual warm memory of who she was and what you shared, she feels an echo of it, like a warmth in the distance, like hearing your name called in a language you don't quite speak but somehow understand." Can I talk to her? Can I tell her I'm sorry? You can speak. Whether she hears the words or only feels the intention, I cannot say. But yes, you can speak. And more importantly, you can live in a way that honors what you shared. You can build patterns of grace. You can practice the acceptance she mastered. You can spend your remaining years moving toward light, so that when your own transition comes, you move toward her rather than away from her. The weight in my chest, that 3-year accumulation of guilt and grief, it was still there. But it felt different now. Not lighter exactly, but transformed, like it had changed from a wall into a doorway. Like it could be either the thing that destroyed me or the thing that saved me. And the choice was mine. "I don't know if I can do it," I said. "I don't know if I can change patterns I've spent 60 years building." "You can. I know you can. Because you helped me tonight when you had no reason to. Because you chose connection over fear. Because the capacity for grace is in you. It is in all consciousness. It simply needs to be practiced, strengthened, chosen again and again until the pattern becomes natural." The vibration in the craft grew stronger, a low harmonic that I felt in my bones. He stood, moving with that impossible fluid grace, and looked down at me with those luminous eyes. "Wait," I said. "I have to ask. Why did you crash? What were you doing here in the first place?" A long pause. "Then I was looking for someone. Someone who needed to hear what I have told you. Someone who still had time to change. And I found him." "You mean you crashed on purpose?" "This whole thing was not purpose, exactly, but intention. Consciousness shapes reality in ways you do not yet understand. I needed to speak with you. And so circumstances arranged themselves. Call it fate. Call it divine will. Call it the mysterious way in which beings who need to meet find each other across impossible distances. The name does not matter. What matters is that you heard, that you understand, that you will remember." He turned toward the craft, then paused and looked back at me one final time. "One more thing. Sarah asked me to tell you something. At her transition, in the moment before she moved into light, she thought of you. And her thought was not, 'I am scared.' Her thought was, 'Tell Marcus I understand. Tell him it was always okay. Tell him to live.' And then his hand left my chest, and the connection broke completely, and I was alone with my tears and the starlight and the weight of knowledge too vast to fully hold." The craft hummed, not loudly, but with a frequency that seemed to resonate in every cell of my body, in the earth beneath me, in the air itself. The fracture in the hull had sealed completely, where there had been a gaping wound. Now there was only the smooth, iridescent surface, whole and perfect, as if the damage had never existed. My copper wire bridges and electrical tape were nowhere to be seen. The craft had absorbed them, integrated them, used them as a catalyst for its own healing, and then moved beyond them. I stood on shaking legs, backing away to give him space. He moved around the vessel with purpose now. His injury completely healed. That strange grace returned in full. He touched various points on the surface, and sections of the hull responded, opening and reshaping themselves in ways that hurt to watch. Geometry that shouldn't work. Spaces that seemed larger on the inside than the outside. I looked away, focusing instead on the horizon where the first hint of dawn was beginning to gray the eastern sky. How long had we been here? It felt like hours, like days, like no time at all. I pulled out my phone-cracked screen, ancient model I'd never bothered to upgrade after Sarah died, and saw that it was 5:47 in the morning. 3 hours. Only 3 hours since I'd walked off my porch and into a different universe. "So you're leaving now," I said. Not a question. He turned from his work and made that harmonic sound that I'd learned meant yes, or agreement, or acknowledgement. Then he moved toward me one final time, and I saw something in his posture that might have been reluctance. Or maybe I was projecting. Maybe I was the one reluctant to let this impossible night end, to return to the ordinary world where I'd have to decide what to do with everything I'd learned. He reached out and touched my forehead. Not my chest this time. My forehead right at the center, where mystics talk about the third eye. The contact was lighter than before, more gentle, but the effect was immediate. The connection reopened, that presence flooding back into my mind. Remember, that is all I ask. Remember what you felt. Remember what you saw. Remember that you still have time. That you have always had time. That time is the great gift of physical existence. The ability to change, to grow, to practice new patterns before the final transition comes. I don't think I could forget if I wanted to, I said. I don't think I'll ever sleep again. You will sleep, but differently than before. The knowledge will work in you. It will change how you see each moment, how you value each choice. This is not a curse. It is an awakening. Uncomfortable, yes. Difficult, yes. But necessary. What do I do now? How do I live with this? How do I go back to farming and grocery shopping and paying bills when I've felt what's actually waiting on the other side? You live with intention, with awareness, with practice. Every moment someone speaks to you, you practice listening fully. Every moment you feel anger, you practice letting it go. Every moment you are tempted toward isolation, you practice choosing connection instead. Small choices, thousands of them. Building the pattern that will carry you home when the time comes. Home, I repeated. You make it sound like heaven is where we're supposed to end up, like the separation is the aberration. It is. Connection is the natural state of consciousness. Love is the fundamental frequency of reality. The separation only occurs when consciousness has been so twisted, so damaged, so trained in fear that it cannot accept its own true nature. It is the exception, not the rule. But it happens often enough to break my heart every time I witness it. You have a heart? You feel things? Of course. All consciousness feels. I am simply consciousness in a different form than yours, operating at a different frequency, but the core is the same. I feel joy when I witness a successful transition. I feel sorrow when I witness the separation. I feel gratitude when someone like you helps me without understanding why. Emotion is not limited to your species, Marcus. It is the language of consciousness itself. The sky was definitely lighter now, gray fading to pale blue at the edges, stars disappearing one by one, the ordinary world reasserting itself. Soon farmers would wake, tractors would start, the day's work would begin, and I would have to figure out how to exist in that world while carrying the weight of what I now knew. Will I see you again? I asked. Unlikely. My work takes me across vast distances, through many layers of reality. But you will feel me sometimes. When you make a choice toward grace, when you practice acceptance, when you honor Sarah's memory by living fully, in those moments you will feel a warmth, a presence, an encouragement. That will be me, watching from the spaces between, glad that my words took root. And when I die, when my transition comes, will you be there? I do not know. The future is not fixed, even for beings like me. But whether I am there or another witness stands in my place, you will not be alone. No consciousness transitions alone. There is always a witness, always a guide for those who wish to move toward light, always an invitation to connection. What matters is whether you have practiced acceptance enough to take the offered hand. He removed his hand from my forehead. The connection didn't break entirely this time. I could still feel a thin thread of it, a faint presence lingering in the back of my mind. A gift, I realized. A reminder. A way to know that this had been real when the rational part of my brain inevitably started questioning. The craft was fully active now, hovering a few inches above the crater floor, silent despite the obvious power coursing through it. The orange pulse had been replaced by a steady blue-white glow that reflected off the cornstalks and turned the pre-dawn field into something otherworldly. He walked toward an opening that had appeared in the hull, a doorway that definitely hadn't been there a moment ago. Then he paused and turned back one final time. Live, Marcus. That is what Sarah wanted. That is what the universe wants. That is what your remaining years are for. Not penance, not punishment, not endless guilt, but life. Full and present and awake. Every moment of genuine connection you experience from this point forward is a gift to her as much as to yourself. Every time you choose grace, you honor what you shared. Every time you practice acceptance, you build the bridge that will carry you home. I'll try, I said. I don't know if I'll succeed, but I'll try. Trying is sufficient. Progress, not perfection. Remember that. The universe does not demand perfection. It only invites movement. Direction matters more than distance. And then he stepped into the craft, and the opening sealed behind him with a sound like a bell being struck underwater. The vessel rose smoothly, without effort, without sound, beyond that deep harmonic hum. It hovered there for a moment, maybe 20 feet above the crater, and I could feel him through that lingering connection. A wordless goodbye, a blessing, a hope. Then the craft shot upward with impossible speed, a streak of blue-white light that disappeared into the lightning sky in less than a second. No sonic boom, no disturbance of air. One moment it was there, and the next it was simply gone, leaving nothing behind except the crater and the scorched corn, and me standing there with shimmer fluid still faintly glowing on my hands. I stood in that field for a long time, watching the sky grow lighter, watching the stars fade completely, watching the sun finally break the horizon and turn the corn stalks gold. The world looked the same as it always had, the same field I'd walked 1,000 times, the same sky I'd watched every morning, the same earth under my feet. But I was different. I was fundamentally, irreversibly changed. Eventually, I walked back to my truck, drove slowly across the field, the suspension complaining over the rough ground, parked in my usual spot by the barn, walked into the house that had felt like a tomb for 3 years. But it didn't feel like a tomb anymore. It felt like a house. Just a house. Empty, yes. Quiet, yes. But not haunted. Not anymore. I made coffee. Not because I was tired, though I should have been exhausted after a night like that, but because it was what I did every morning. The ritual of it. The smell of grounds and hot water. The sound of the pot percolating normal things. Ordinary things. But I experienced them differently now. Fully. Present in each moment instead of drifting through them like a ghost. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table Sarah and I had eaten breakfast at for 26 years, and wrapped my hands around the warm mug. Through the window I could see the sun fully risen now, bright and clean. A Saturday. The day stretched ahead of me, empty of obligations. Usually that would have filled me with dread, all those hours to fill, all that silence to endure. But I didn't feel dread. I felt something else, something I hadn't felt in 3 years. Purpose. I thought about what he'd said. Small choices, thousands of them, building patterns, practicing acceptance, moving toward connection instead of isolation. I thought about Sarah, existing somewhere in a state of consciousness I couldn't fully understand, but at peace, complete, held in light. And I thought about her final message to me, carried across impossible distance by an impossible being. Tell Marcus I understand. Tell him it was always okay. Tell him to live. Live. Such a simple word. Such an impossible instruction. But I was going to try. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts. Names I hadn't called in months. In years, some of them. People I'd cut off after Sarah died because I couldn't bear their sympathy, their concern, their attempts to help. My daughter, living in Portland with her family. My son in Denver, Sarah's sister. My old friend Tom from church, who'd stopped by every week for 6 months until I'd finally made it clear enough that I wanted to be alone. that he'd stopped coming. I selected my daughter's name, pressed call before I could talk myself out of it. It was early, not quite 7 on a Saturday, but I knew she'd be up. She had young kids. She was always up. She answered on the third ring, voice thick with sleep and surprise. "Dad? Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," I said, and I realized as I said it that it was true, or true enough, or would be true, eventually, if I kept choosing it. "I just wanted to call, wanted to hear your voice, wanted to tell you that I love you." Silence on the other end. I could hear her breathing, could almost feel her surprise, her cautious hope that maybe her father was finally coming back from wherever he'd disappeared to when her mother died. "I love you too, Dad," she said carefully. "Is something wrong? You sound different." "Nothing's wrong. Something's right, actually. Something's finally right. And I know I've been—" I paused, searching for words. "I know I haven't been present. Not really, not since Mom died. I've been going through the motions, but I haven't been here. Haven't been the father you needed. Haven't been the grandfather your kids deserve. And I'm sorry for that. But I want to change. I want to do better." "Dad," her voice cracked, "you don't have to apologize. We understood. Grief it's hard. We just missed you." "I missed me too," I said. And then, because the words were pushing up through my chest and I couldn't hold them back anymore, "Your mother's okay. I know that now. I can't explain how I know, but I do. She's okay, and she wants us to be okay too. She wants us to live." My daughter was crying now. I could hear it in her breathing. "How do you know that?" "I just do. Trust me. She's at peace. And we need to be at peace too, not by forgetting her, but by honoring her, by living the way she'd want us to live. Fully connected. Present." We talked for another 20 minutes, about her kids, about her husband's new job, about whether I'd come visit for Thanksgiving. Small things. Normal things. But I was actually listening this time. Actually engaged. Actually there in the conversation, instead of just enduring it until I could hang up and return to my isolation. When we finally said goodbye, I sat there with the phone in my hand, feeling something warm in my chest. Connection. That's what it was. The opposite of the separation, the thing that would save me when my time came. I made more calls. To my son, to Sarah's sister, to Tom, who answered with obvious surprise and then obvious joy when I asked if he wanted to come over for dinner sometime next week. "Yes," I said. "I'd cook." No, I wasn't dying. I was just tired of being half dead. By the time I finished calling people, it was almost noon. My coffee had gone cold hours ago. My stomach was reminding me I hadn't eaten since yesterday afternoon. But I felt more awake than I had in years. Not physically, my body was exhausted, running on fumes and adrenaline and the fading traces of whatever that shimmer fluid had been. But mentally, spiritually, whatever you want to call it, I felt awake. I made myself eggs and toast. Ate standing at the counter, looking out the window at the field where a crater and scorched corn marked the place where my life had split into before and after. I'd have to deal with that eventually. Figure out how to explain it if anyone noticed. Maybe plow it under. Maybe leave it as a reminder. After I ate, I went upstairs to the bedroom I'd been avoiding for 3 years. Sarah's side of the closet still held her clothes. Her books were still on her nightstand. Her reading glasses were still folded on top of them, waiting for eyes that would never return. I'd left it all exactly as it was the day she went into the hospital, unable to face packing it away, unable to admit she was really gone. But she wasn't gone. Not in the way I'd thought. She was transformed, transitioned. Existing in a state I couldn't fully understand, but no longer needed to fear. I sat on her side of the bed, something I hadn't done in 3 years, and picked up one of her books, a novel she'd been halfway through when she got sick, I opened it to the bookmarked page and ran my fingers over the words she'd last read. And I felt it. That warmth, that presence. Not her exactly, but the echo of her. The connection that death had transformed but not severed. I heard him, I said out loud to the empty room. I heard what you wanted me to know. And I'm going to try. I'm going to live. I don't know if I'll be any good at it after 3 years of practice at dying, but I'm going to try. The room was silent. But the silence felt different now. Not empty, full of potential, full of choice. I stood and opened the curtains, letting light flood into the space that had been dim for so long. Then I started taking her clothes out of the closet. Not to throw them away. Some I'd keep, some I'd give to our daughter, some I'd donate. But the point was motion. Change. The practice of letting go while still honoring what was. I worked through the afternoon, sorting and folding and boxing, and every time I felt grief rising, which was often, I didn't push it away. I let it come, let it move through me, let it exist without letting it consume me. This was the practice. This was building the pattern, feeling without being destroyed by feeling, grieving without drowning in grief, remembering without being trapped in memory. By evening I was exhausted in a way I hadn't been in years, actually tired from actual work, both physical and emotional. I took a shower, washing the last traces of shimmer fluid from my hands, watching it swirl down the drain in faint streaks of light. Then I crawled into bed my side, not hers, and lay there staring at the ceiling. I should have been afraid I wouldn't sleep, should have been dreading another night of staring at the clock. But I wasn't afraid. I was simply present. And when sleep finally came, it came gently, like a hand guiding me down into darkness that was no longer frightening because I finally understood what darkness actually was. Not hell, not separation. Just rest. Just the natural rhythm of consciousness in a physical form. Just sleep. But before I drifted off completely, I thought about his words, about the separation, about the pattern I was building, about the choices that mattered. And I made a decision. When I woke up, if I woke up, because none of us are promised tomorrow, I would keep trying, keep practicing, keep choosing connection over isolation, acceptance over judgment, love over fear. Small choices, thousands of them. Building a pattern that would carry me home. And every night when I close my eyes, I don't see darkness anymore. I see every person I haven't loved enough yet, and I wake up determined to fix that before it's too late.